Good evening, everybody. And this is the third quarter edition of the ARRL Section live stream. I'm Mark Tarpley, N4UFP, the section manager, and I'll be the host this evening. And join me will be a bunch of guys who know a lot more than I do about pretty much everything there is to know anything about. And that would be the Roanoke Division Director, Jim Boner, N2ZZ. We have, I think, Bill Marine, the Vice Director for the Roanoke Division, is also with us, N2COP. And I know our Public Information Coordinator, the ever popular and talented Gordon Hoonihan, W4EGM. He's on board. And the guy who handles all the technical stuff, Technical Coordinator for the South Carolina section, Brad, AE4VJ. And we have a special Kabluna Hour triple double-time mystery guest from York County Amateur Radio Society, John Gendron, NJ4Z. And remember, any legal issues that come up will be handled by our esteemed law firm, Dewey, Burnham & Howe. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad for any additional comments and warnings that may be in order.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. Everybody, silence your cell phones. We got a packed show tonight. We got a big group. We got John's going to talk about white cars and their article they had in the September edition. Is that right, John, of QST? Yep. On revitalizing the club. They've done a tremendous amount of work, and what inspiration that is. And we got some other stuff on tap that we're going to get to. I still got to get some notes up. So, Mark, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Brad, is it okay if I mess with the agenda?
Whatever you need to do.
All right. Well, let me do this. Let me turn it over to John. For those of you who have looked at the September issue of QST, there was a very nice article about the York County Amateur Radio Society that's up here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. What they did, the short version is they brought the club back from the dead. I've been a member for that club for a long time, and at one point it got down to about 8 to 10 people sitting at a table in a room whining. And I was pretty sure that the club was headed the same place the dinosaurs wound up. But a new team came in, some younger amateurs. John was among them, and they brought that club back from the dead. It's very impressive what they did. And he can tell the story much better than I, so I'm going to shut up and turn it over to you, John. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and glad to have everybody here tonight. And yeah, it was. It's been an adventure the last 4.5, 5 years with the club. I have to thank Gordon for helping us get that article published in QST. It was a good story, and hopefully it rang true with some other folks. And so the club, when I joined in 2016, was about 36 members. And I walked into the place, and I didn't think I was coming back. And one of the other members there, he basically came in later than I did, and he was the only person that spoke to me. And he's still one of my best friends at K4DQP, Darcy Pock. We made kind of a pact that night, and there were a couple conversations afterwards, after we exchanged phone numbers, that, we didn't feel welcome. He didn't feel welcome when he joined the club. I didn't feel welcome. But there was so much potential with the building we have there. And, there's so much history with that club being founded in 1948. We said, we can try and do something here. We just got to find out who's willing to do it. And, half the time making changes, you have to realize you need change. And some people didn't realize that. It become a social club. Mark, you can attest to that. I think Brad, you can too. Basically, they wanted to get together and eat and talk, and that's pretty much it. So Darcy and I kind of decided that we were going to welcome everybody that came in the clubhouse. I don't care if they remember 50 years or if they were a brand new member. We were not going to let people feel like we did when we came into that club. And that was really the first step. That got us to a point where, everybody felt welcome. Within a month or two, we didn't have to stand by the door. Everybody else was greeting everybody. That thing became contagious. And then we started little steps where we were like, this club needs to do something. It needs to be radioactive. And we had, our field day, like every other club in the country, will get together on field day. And for most clubs, that's the only thing they do. We had a Christmas party, we had field day, and on occasion they do South Carolina CUSA party. We went back into the radio room in the club because we've got a nice facility. It's 30 by 50 and radio room, towers, the whole works. But none of the equipment was worth the crap, and nobody was using it, and it was in the radio room become a storage closet. So we reclaimed that. 5 of us went in there one night, and we said it's better to ask for forgiveness than wish for permission. So we went in there and cleaned the place out and decided that at that point in time we were going to come back the next week and operate with our own equipment. And so that became the fun night, radio night, fun night at the clubhouse. And we did it as a monthly event. That thing has become so successful that we do it every week now. We have an open house night. And we open the doors on Wednesday night from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and people come in. We average about 30 people coming to the clubhouse. So that got the club kind of active because we were able to do things together, and it kind of rekindled, I think, the RF in some folks. Then Darcy and I decided that to make real change, we had to take leadership. And so we both ran for president and vice president of the club, and kind of wanted to try some new ideas. So we realized what financial trouble the club was in and some other issues. So we decided to ask for them to give us carte blanche to clean it up, and we did. We started with redoing the Constitution and the bylaws. And that was a real battle. We had some old guard folks that really got their feelings hurt and didn't want to change. And we said, look, guys, if we don't change, we're not going to be here in 18 months. This club is on its last legs. And we got that passed. And then things started to kick off. Being welcoming and having somebody who was willing to lead and having that new platform to work from enabled us to raise money to get new radios for the radio room, which really compounded the activity. We started doing POTA activations. We were doing 3 or 4 contests a year with the open houses on top of that. It really started to take off. And then the leadership, as it changed from Darcy to me to now President Steve Chikowski, W3SPC, we've gone from the old guard leadership style to what we call servant leadership, where we put the club ahead of leadership and we put everybody into a position where they have a stake. We have committee positions for different things like the radio room, communications. We have WHI, which is our welfare, happiness, and inclusion committee, which is a very important committee because they're the ones who are taking the temperature club every quarter and seeing what's working and what's not working. And they do a lot of development for new people coming into the club. So, that's a very valuable group of folks. And we've been able to attract some younger folks, and we're grooming them to take over as Darcy and I and Steve and some of the other guys who've kind of made this transition possible. We're becoming old mules and our ideas are getting a little tired. So we're putting some new people in place to try and do that. I can't say enough. We've got so many programs going on with the ham help desk, which is our group of folks that if we have a new ham that has questions, they call or they send an email to somebody named Vicky and AD3I, and she does a great job of matching Elmer's up with those folks or putting together work groups to go put up antennas at people's houses. She's also spearheading our scouting program. They just had a very successful event out there at Andrew Jackson State Park and Lee State Park, where they're working with the Girl Scouts and getting the ARRL Communications Technicians Badge program done for the scouting or for the Girl Scouts. We've gone from in 2016 from those 35 members to now we boast 130 members in the club. We have about a 20% annual growth rate, and we see about 95% retention. So being an active club, being inclusive to other people's ideas, and we welcome everybody in. We've got virtual members now. We've adopted virtual platforms before COVID, and so we have folks in Florida, North Carolina, and Iowa that are part of our club as well. So, you know, it's all about being willing to make the change, realizing what needs to be changed, and dragging everybody kicking and screaming along. So that's where we're
Okay,
at.
that's pretty cool. I thank you, John. One of the things that's amazing is this club, in a period of 5 or 6 years, almost quadrupled its membership. That's an absolutely unbelievable growth rate. And the key, as John said, was retain them and then engage them, get them involved in things. I think that Wednesday night operating night was a great idea. There's a whole litany of things they did, and John talked about some of them. Before we get too far afield, I want to give a couple of shout outs at folks who have joined us this evening. Good evening, George Mudd, somebody I've known for many, many years. Always good to see him on the list. Philip Chandler, another local person from YCARS, and someone if I've met, I don't recognize the call sign. Merrill, KK4 HFG from Sumter. Good to have you all with us. And if you have any questions, shoot them our way. We'll answer them the best we can. I can't say we'll get it 100% right, but we will give it our best shot. And we have the panel of experts right here. Any comments? Speaking of the panel, any comments from the panel on the September article or YCARS in general? Any additional comments?
I just want to congratulate John and the club because, as you know, I've been around since 2003, so I've seen YCARS like you, Mark, have gone through the ups and downs like most clubs go through their ups and downs. But it's great to see one that may get down to its lowest point and then there's some new life that's brought in and they come up to the point. I don't know if I'm feeding back or not. That not only come back, but come back strong enough to actually score a QST article. So congratulations to YCARS.
Absolutely. I concur with that. And I had a chance to speak with John at the Shelby Hamfest and congratulate him in person on the really advancement that YCARS has made. And just so you know, everybody in South Carolina, the context, not only is this quite the achievement in the South Carolina section and the Roanoke division, it's really a national achievement as to how a club can come back. So hats off to John and everybody in YCARS.
Well, thank you. Gordon, it's rare that our PIC is at a loss for words, so I'm sure you have something to add to this. I don't believe it. Oh, my God.
Muted.
There we go.
It's disappeared.
All I can say is that John has understated what they've accomplished. Mark, you've been with Italian families. I'm from Italian families. When I showed up at Field Day in 2020, at YCARS, I felt like I was in an Italian family. Hey, how you doing? How you been? You know, it was that kind of feeling. You know, you weren't strangers. You were family that hadn't seen each other in ages. And, you know, that is just so contagious.
It is definitely a club that is welcoming of both members and visitors, and I think that has a lot to do with the success. In a couple of minutes, I'll talk a little bit about amateur radio in its second century, and this is a topic we're going to visit again from a slightly different angle. Well, we picked up a few more folks. David, good evening, KY4GM, and Brent Case. Brent, good to have you with us, and somebody that I see on FT8 all the time. I just worked him yesterday during the VHF contest. Philip Jolly, KR4NO. Hello, Philip. Good to have you with us this evening.
He shared the notification out on his group, the Piedmont link. So we really do appreciate that.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah. Nice bunch of folks over there in Gaffney. Well, let's see. Any other comments on what YCARS has done? I think the key is you have members that are willing to step up. I can't stress that enough. John pointed out it all started with him and Darcy saying, yeah, dude, we got to fix this. It requires somebody, one person, maybe two, to be willing to step forward and say, it's time to change. And the funny thing is, once you start the ball rolling, other people will follow.
Yep.
People are always willing to lead from the rear. You just got to get things moving, and you'll get other folks to come on board. They've done a great job. They don't give themselves enough credit. I've been a member of that club forever, and I have seen high points and low points, and these guys really did a great job of, I think the most important thing is they were present, they were active, and they engaged the membership in general. They did not allow these people to be passive. They said, well, you're going to do something.
No.
We don't know what it is. You're going to do something.
Well,
They made sure they got people involved, and that's the key. In order for a club to be successful, it really needs to engage its members, and it doesn't matter what they want to do. There are a lot of different things we can do in amateur radio. The key is getting somebody to do something, and you do that by engaging them and essentially kind of embracing their interests and say, what do you want to do? Let's try that. You never know what's going to happen until you try something. I have to tell one story related to John's partner in crime, Darcy Pock. So Darcy, at the time, his son Walter is an adult now, but Walt was a kid. He couldn't have been about 12 years old, and Walt was interested in contesting. And I belong to another group that's more of a contest group. We were running the 10-meter contest that weekend, and Walter had his license, and they brought him over to sit down and let him try contesting. He was nervous for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then he kind of got his bearings, and it took a bomb to blow him out of that chair. He would probably operate the whole contest if we'd let him. He was having a blast. So a lot of times it's just letting people do something, finding out what might be interesting to them, and then let them get involved. But the key is that engagement, the involvement, the connection. That's what creates a healthy club, and that's a big part of what we're going to need in this second century.
I think part of when that club started going down. Mark, you and I were both members at that time. And kind of the point is, when things happen, don't get discouraged. And I'm just looking at a cable I spent 20 minutes looking for before this, and it was hanging up right here all the time. Sorry.
Squirrel.
But when they lost their Hamfest site, the castle, that was really discouraging because it was such a great site, straight off the interstate. It's laid out beautifully. And then trying to find a home. I don't know if that caused some discouragement, but John and them, they came down. They said, all right, this is what we got to work with. Let's make it the best we can do. And that's exactly what they did.
Well, to Gordon's point, we want everybody to feel at home in that club. I don't care whether you've been a member for 50 years or you're a brand new person walking in that door. We want somebody to greet you. We want somebody to, ask you about why you're there, what's your part in ham radio, and if you don't know anything about ham radio, we're going to try and explain it to you and show it to you. I can't tell you, over the last 2 months, and I've missed a couple of the Wednesday night open houses because I've been traveling, but we've had people that have seen the live stream we do on Monday nights on the net. They have seen videos from the club, or they've seen something that's attracted them to our club, whether it's posting in Facebook, on social media, and they've come in. They have no idea about amateur radio, but they're interested. And we've had 4 or 5 people test and get their license over the last 2 months that would have never found us if it wasn't for those open houses.
And that's another interesting part of what YCARS did. Retaining your members is very important, but another important aspect of a club's operation is bringing new people into the amateur radio service, recruiting new members.
John hasn't even mentioned what they were doing for.
Yeah, well,
that's what I'm trying to segue into here.
I'm sorry.
We're going to get John to talk about that a little bit.
Boys.
Yeah,
Hey.
I'm going to separate you two.
I'm telling you,
My bartender's not here. That's the problem.
let me tell you something. That is serious. I understand, because you have probably the nicest, most charming bartender I have ever met in my life.
Yeah.
You should tip that bartender generously.
Oh, I do. I'll be getting a text in a minute
Yep.
because she's watching. She said hi to John.
Anyway, John, we got down a rabbit hole. So let's talk a little bit about recruitment.
So recruitment, when we do a lot on social media, obviously with live streams and posting, and I've gotten to the point where I post to like Rock Hill events, York County events. I cry, and I've gotten called down a few times on Facebook for cross posting to about every ham radio site there is when we have something going on. But you know what? It's about promotion. What's that?
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I know. It I usually, when we have something big going on, I'll usually spend about 2 hours cross posting stuff. Once you build a list, it's not that bad. But one of the things we do well is when we test, we've gone to W5IY testing. We test electronically now, but we always have an officer at the test session. And Brent, who's in here, I think K4BSC, he took a cue from the QST or from getting on air, and that new ham radio handbook or getting started guide that they put out, the ARRL put out. He took it and modified it on his own and sent it to me, and we bind that up. We give it to every new technician that passes their test. But we have an officer talk to him about the club, talk to him about ham radio, and then we have a generous donor that buys radios, and we give away one dual band handheld every test session to a lucky technician that passed his test or passed her test. And the other thing we do is we immediately open up the radio room after the test session and try to get people on air, whether it's on the 2-meter 440 rig or if it's on HF, if they want to try it. They may not have their call sign yet, but we've got control operators. We'll let them run under the club call. So they feel that, that rush. They got their license and we get them on air. And like Mark says, if 50% of the people don't get on air, they'll never get on air after they get their license. So we try to get them excited about that. We try to match them up with an Elmer as quickly as possible. And, so that's a big part of the recruitment. We do testing. If they're anywhere within the area, probably within an hour, we've got guys driving up from Lexington and Lakewood to come up and spend time with our club, and as far away as Waxhaw and Shelby, actually, to spend time with the club because they like it. If we can get them engaged, I think we have about a 70% hit rate with people who come test with us that they join the club if they're within an hour.
And as you were talking about that, John, I was just thinking about my experience. I wound up with a 4-call because I didn't have time to get to a ham fest and get licensed before I left New Jersey. So instead of having a 2-call, since I'm a 2-land expatriate, I wound up with a 4-call. Here's what's fascinating. I took my test at the Y-Cars Ham Fest. It was held at Jocelyn Park in those days, back in the 1980s, still the first Sunday in October. And I walked out a brand new tech. No one ever mentioned the York County Amateur Radio Society to me. Nobody even congratulated me for passing. They just made sure they had my money and said, you passed. You're going to hear from the Federal Communications Commission in about a month. Good luck. Okay. I actually sought the club out about a year later because I thought surely there must be a ham radio club somewhere in Rock Hill. I originally thought they came down from Charlotte. So I had to go find them and then go through a process where I had to demonstrate that I was worthy to be a member, which was interesting. At the same time, I joined another club, the Carolina DX Association, and many of you may be members or you may be familiar with it. You know, it was funny. They didn't ask me any questions about my worthiness or anything else. Ted Goldthorpe, W4VHF, he's a silent key now. He asked me one question. He said, dues are $30. You got $30? I sure do. End of discussion. I was certainly glad I joined Y-Cars. They didn't make it easy, which I thought was odd. And they weren't very good at engaging their membership. And I couldn't figure out how they had 125 members. That was always a mystery to me. But the thing that I really appreciate now is that the club has done something, and I have to stress it because John said it. He mentioned servant leadership. The club has essentially turned around the cultural model they had when I first encountered them, which was you served the club. They really flipped that around to say the club serves its members. I think that's important. I think that's why people come. I think it's why they stay. And that's more than you wanted to know about that. Anybody got any closing comments before we schlep into the next agenda item? Wow. Ham's what to say. Is that possible? I'm going to irritate Brad and change up the agenda a little bit. I'm going to ask our Roanoke Division Director and Vice Director if they have any comments they want to make, and then after they're done, maybe I'll get into the amateur radio second century discussion. But I wanted to give them a chance to weigh in with any comments they might have first. Gentlemen, take it away.
Bill, you're our best public speaker. Please go ahead and take the honors.
Thank you, Jim. First of all, I'm horrified by my image. It looks as though I'm either jaundiced or I'm coming from a submarine cockpit tonight in the yellow hue that I have. And again, congratulations to John and Y-Cars for what they've done. They are truly the model of how a club can become revitalized. I do want to add two things, which I hear about a lot and which have been substantiated in surveys from ARRL. And that is two very simple things that any club can do right now. And it's back to basics. And the clubs have forgotten what this is. Number one is wear a badge. If you're having any kind of event, people getting together, wear a badge. And I have found, yes, thank you, Mark. I have found that it is true that when you get somebody who's a new member, that everybody else already existing in the club, they know who each other is, but the new person doesn't. And they want to engage. They want to be able to associate a name and a face together. And so many of these newer hams come in and afterwards say to me, I feel as though I'm at a disadvantage because I don't know who the other people were. And I couldn't make a connection between their face and their call sign. So that's number one. Number two, and Jim's going to laugh because this is a pet peeve of mine, and that is every club has a repeater, and it's a designated repeater for club activities. If you don't monitor it all the time, for goodness sake, will you please monitor it for at least 1 hour prior to every scheduled event? I've run into not only new hams who buy HTs or equipment and say, I'm so disappointed because nobody in the local club will answer a call on the repeater. But we have to remember, particularly those of us who live in communities which are retirement-related communities, that we have people relocating to the area who may have been inactive, but their FM VHF gear from the 1980s and the 1990s still works, still has PL tones. Maybe it needs a new battery, but if you hook it up, what worked in 1985 is working in 2022. But they don't realize that things have changed. So maybe they get on thinking it's still 1985. Oh boy, I'm going to get on the repeater and have a QSO with a bunch of people. And they never have anyone come back to them. I've run across at least two hams who are people who came back to the hobby after many years and said that they put out a shout on the repeater before a scheduled luncheon to shore up plans and make sure they were at the correct restaurant, where to go, and nobody responded to them. So I'm on a crusade to have people not only monitor the club repeater before an event, be it a meeting or a luncheon or a dinner, but also somebody bring an HT into the restaurant or the meeting. So if a question comes through while that event's taking place, they can respond. And when clubs say, I don't understand why we're not getting more members, here's a very simple way that they can engage with new people back in the field.
Thank you, Bill. I don't think there's much anybody can add to that. Any other comments?
I just want to say one thing. I always enjoy Bill's optimism, and he shamed me, so I put my badge on. I consider him a real optimist. And the old joke is that the optimist finds the glass half full and the pessimist finds it half empty, while the engineer says, that glass is twice as large as it needs to be. Well, Bill is definitely the optimist. We will get to a Hamfest or a thing, and I will say, so did you monitor 5.2 or did you try to get the repeaters on the way down? And he may have gone through several states, and he'll always smile and look down at the ground and said, not one repeater, but I got one person on 5.2. So the amazing thing about repeaters is that everybody has drastic ownership of repeaters. Like, it's my repeater, it's my frequency pair and everything, and everybody's so possessive of repeaters, but then nobody uses them. So in any case, a club that's very active will have some sort of a communication source where everybody can speak with each other, and the repeater is probably a good place to be. And as Bill says, whenever there's an event, it's nice to have someone on the repeater to be able to, at least if you're either at the wrong time, wrong place, or whatever, that's somebody that you can get a hold of someone. So definitely agree with that. And from the league side, I just wanted to remind everyone that the league is really pushing clubs now. You notice that there's a new club newsletter out, put out by Mike Walters, and that comes out at least monthly. And it's got a lot of good information. And if you send information to Mike Walters, it may actually get published. So something for Gordon and the rest, if you have any clubs in the section that really have something interesting. You know, people that are in news always are looking for things to be able to print. And of course, we went through the first round of club grants. We got 2 in the Roanoke division, and the next round is coming up. And I know Y-Cars, hopefully, are going to be reapplying in the rest. And I hope other clubs do the same. And one of the things that has come out of all this is that you just have to be very particular about what you want and be very detailed about what you want. To say that you're trying to involve more people in amateur radio might not get a grant, but if you basically have everything costed out and the rest, you might have a better chance. So I'm really excited about clubs. I've always said that they were the backbone of amateur radio, because it's really the local people getting together and really finding what the joy of amateur radio is. As I see the clubs, I mean, I've seen so many different things. I've seen clubs split up and go into different directions, and then eventually get back together. You know, they originally say, you know, the people that are in the club don't have the same interests of us. And someone goes off and does an offshoot, and then eventually they get back together again. But one of the more, I guess, not very amusing stories is the club in which the president was trying to run a meeting, and everybody was bickering. Well, the president had a heart attack in the club meeting, and the ambulance kind of brought him away. And you would think everybody would be somber and close the meeting. Nope, they continued bickering. So one of those things is that, you know, you just have to realize what's important. The president's doctor basically appropriately advised him, don't go back to that club. And he didn't. He's now a silent key now for other reasons, but I'm just very happy to hear about Y-Cars and the rest, because it just kind of shows the progress of a club that really has come back, and that's very exciting. So back to you, Mark.
Goes to say, remember, this is just a hobby.
Let me catch up with a couple of comments out on the list. We got one from Broken Signal down in Somerville, KD5W. He pointed out, talked about his experience about running into lots of dead repeaters when he was first licensed. And I bet that was discouraging. And I experienced a similar situation here in Rock Hill. The repeater was, local repeater was lightly used, to say the least. And one of the things I really have to tip my hat to Whitecars about is they use that repeater. That repeater is a communications tool. They have regular nets that go on, and I think John quoted a statistic: 52 nets a month, roughly. That's almost 2 a day, I think. And
yeah, we run every
a,
weekday at 11 a.m. and every weeknight at
8:30 p.m.
And then we have Aries every Monday and a Simplex net once a month.
And then I know I have not been to this event in a while, but you have a Thursday lunch get together as well.
Right.
That's
every Thursday, 11:30. Different restaurants around the community. It can be 4 folks or it could be 20. You never know who's going to show up.
Well, that tells you a lot about the restaurant. if only 4 people show up, that might be one you want to skip in the future.
Yeah, I might have a bee on the wall.
I have been to that lunch group a couple of times because they occasionally pick one of the restaurants that's about a mile and a half from where I live, so I can get over there. But all these things represent forms of engagement, and that's what makes them valuable. It's an opportunity to engage with the membership of your club, to find out what they're interested in, what they're doing, what they want you to do. And that segues into something I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, which is, okay, amateur radio has been around for 100 years. Hopefully it'll be around for a few hundred more. So what are we going to do in the next century? What's it going to look like? And I'll open it with some comments about where we've already been. How did this all start? If you think about the very beginning, in the beginning, there were only amateurs. There were no professionals in the radio business. There was no radio business. It was amateurs. I mean, even the guy who demonstrated that radio was a thing, Guglielmo Marconi, he didn't fully understand what he was doing or why it worked, but he knew how to make it work, and that was enough. And there were amateurs long before there were any regulations at all. In fact, the first attempt at regulating amateurs came in 1912. A guy who's more famous for something else, Herbert Hoover, who was at the time Secretary of Commerce, was the first to sit down and regulate what amateurs did. That was good in some ways, and it provided an interesting opportunity for amateurs. They got some spectrum that was deemed to be useless, which actually turned out to be really, really valuable, and they were the folks who figured that out. And that was kind of the hold on, John just posted something. Well, all I can say about Tesla is I guess he's 1 for 2, because if Marconi stole the idea, that was bad. We're not even going to get into that discussion right now, because I know a little bit about Tesla's work and what he did, and he was actually trying to accomplish a different goal. On the other hand, Tesla didn't get a win for radio, but he was the guy that invented the entire electrical generation distribution network that we now enjoy. So that's a significant accomplishment in itself, particularly since a famous American by the name of Thomas Alva Edison did everything he could to make sure that was never going to happen. Another story for another day. Amateur radio started out as an experimental service. It really did. And we did a lot of experimenting in the 1920s, the 1930s. Even after World War II, there was a huge market for surplus equipment. Amateurs snapped it up and turned it into other things. Amateurs, essentially, some of the ideas behind repeaters and linked repeater systems later surfaced again in the 1980s as something called cellular telephony. Amateurs innovated. They did a lot of different things. But while all this was happening, something else happened. Amateurs started to get older. There was a big growth spurt in the period after World War I, and another huge growth spurt period after World War II. It started to level off, and the average age of amateurs increased. And by the end of the 20th century, that number was getting fairly large. And what began to happen is the amateur radio community became more conservative, not in the political sense, but in the sense that it was not as accepting of change. People began to think more about where we had been and venerating the past than trying to develop the future. And that's kind of where we are now. I'm going to use a term that a former member of the league staff, Dan Henderson, used in a presentation. He talked about this in Charleston in 2019. He talked about the guardians, the people who are the guardians of our hobby, of our traditions, of our ways of doing things. There's value in that. If you don't pay attention to the past, there's always the danger that you might repeat it. So it's good to be aware of where you've been. You should also need to spend some time thinking about where you're going. And that's been a challenge for amateur radio recently. So what happens next? In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina, the emphasis was really put on public service. Amateurs can provide this great public service, and that's why we're important. That's why we're relevant. That's why we should have spectrum, because when all else fails, we're going to be there with our repeaters, talking to each other, and we're going to take care of things. Okay, that's important. It really is. That's why I have a SEC. It's important enough for me to have an appointee who's chopped just to deal with that. But here's the interesting thing. There are 10,000 amateurs in South Carolina, roughly speaking. About 400 of them are actively involved in MCOM and public service. 4%. So while it's important, I'm glad we're doing it and we need to keep doing it. Turns out it doesn't really resonate with the other 96%. So we've got to think, we can't simply style ourselves as an emergency communication service and think that we're going to grow or prosper in the 21st century. I think that the solution that comes, number one, will involve clubs. We just talked about a club that's done a great job of engaging with its members, providing opportunities for its members to actually experience different things in amateur radio, whether it's, I don't know if he's still here, but Frank Pace, K4BSC, guy loves fox hunts. It could be 20 degrees below zero and freezing rain outside, but if you wanted to have a fox hunt, Brent would probably be your guy. Yeah, see, just rebuilt his fox hunt box. He loves fox hunts. And the great thing is he's willing to share that with the folks in the club so that other people can benefit from that. It's a great way to engage people that have that shared interest. But one of the things I think we have to get back to, something that got lost in all the other things, is the whole reason we exist. Our $10 phrase would be raison d'etre. And that is the experimental component, the technology-driven component. We shouldn't lose sight of that. I think clubs are a great way to help promote that, but I think each of us has to remember, ultimately, the whole reason we even have a license is because somebody thought we were capable of figuring things out that nobody else was going to see. It's an experimental service. Go do something new. We'll steal it from you later and patent it, but go have fun. Have a good day. That's the piece we lost. We adopted some other things that were added value and were worth doing, but the very thing that made us unique, made us different from commercial radio services like radio broadcasters, TV broadcasters, and so on, various commercial interests, was that we were experimental and kind of committed to messing with technology. And we do that to some degree, but I think we need to do it to a greater degree. I think not only do we need to do it to a greater degree, but I think we have to expand our horizon about what technology means. It's not just about the radio. There's no such thing as just a radio anymore. It's about software. It's about computers. It's not about a piece of equipment. It's about a system. It's about all these pieces working together. It's about communications. Anyway, I'm gonna stop the sermon right here before I do too much proselytizing, and let somebody tell me why I'm completely and utterly wrong. And the good news is, I won't be the first person today who's doing that. Somebody must have a comment.
Well, you talked about, it's not just the radio, and that's right. It's deeper than that. It's about communicating and using whatever resources you have to communicate with. We're going to get down to this. It's just going to happen. But some people complain about FT8. Running FT8 is no different than working a pile up on CW, except it's a little bit easier. But
Well, the complaints have been around.
Anyway, moving on for that. But, passing traffic and all that, we need to look to the future and what we have and what we can use to effectively communicate when we need to.
Yes. The thing that's interesting about ham radio, it's no different from any other human endeavor. Yes, thank you, Broken Signal. Do not be an appliance operator. That's a very pithy and completely accurate and appropriate statement.
Well put.
That should be one of the takeaways from this talk. Do not be an appliance operator. Look under the hood. And I get it. Nobody's going to build their own equipment today. But the key is integrating the equipment into a system. It's how do I get this piece of equipment to function with something else to do something else? Folks who are in the maker space, that's an interesting environment, and how you can make things that can help you construct different things with amateur radio.
Well, Mark, look at all these guys building these remote stations using Node Red right now.
Yep.
You look at groups like what is it? RHR. They've built a business on building remote stations and leasing those stations out. You look at some of these groups that are contesting, that are doing the distributed contesting, where they're using, they may have operators all over the world, and they're using 3 or 4 sets of antennas all over the world. That's where it's going, right? Linking all these things, the IoT of things, using that. Now, granted, I'm a kind of a purist in the fact that I really want my signal bouncing off of the atmosphere and not through an internet link, but controlling it to do it, that's a whole different story. And you look at what you talked about FT8, Brad, and what Joe Taylor did out of I think he's in Princeton, right? You think about what that's brought to the hobby and how hot that's made the hobby when we had a down solar cycle where the conditions were so bad this last solar cycle at the bottom of it. I mean, you were looking to make 3 or 4 contacts a week if it wasn't for FT8. Now that we're coming off of it, I think everybody's kind of going, okay, I can still have fun with FT8, but I'm back to CW and sideband as well, because I've noticed that traffic picking up. But
even 20 meters FT8, that segment of the band is lit. Every band, yep. The FT8, it's just lit up. 15
well, it's an easy
meters.
way to make contacts.
Yeah,
it's like anything else. It's an example of how communications technology marches on,
mm-hmm.
and hams have been involved in that since the very beginning. It was interesting. I've had discussions with people about FT8 and whether or not it's even this one was fascinating, whether it was a legitimate mode, whether it should even be allowed. And it was weird. I mean, it reminded me of the discussions I heard when I was a kid back in the 1960s about why single sideband was a horrible idea, because it was just a bunch of people sounding quack, quack, quack like Donald Duck. And that wasn't even ham radio. That was something else. Real ham radio, you had a 3,000-pound transformer in that transmitter somewhere, and you had plate modulated AM. That was the only way you did ham radio. No, FT8 kind of broke the mold,
mm-hmm.
and maybe that's what people will do from now on. But it's no different from every other shift in ham radio. One time, everything was radio telegraphy, and then AM telephony came along, and all of a sudden there were CW guys and phone guys But what was interesting was as time went on, there were more and more phone guys, and then there was sideband, and then there were guys off on the sidebar somewhere experimenting with RTTY. What Joe Taylor did was he created a way that you could do digital modes with a PC and without a lot of hardware, pretty much any HF radio, and you could do a lot of things with it. I mean, FT8 is one. I ran Moon Bounce for a while, running JT65. When I was young, Moon Bounce was a difficult thing to do. But with JT65, a couple of good Yagis at 500 watts, I worked people all over the world on 2 meters, as weird as that sounds. So
Took forever.
yeah, it did. It took a while. Yeah,
but when it came out with FT8, it's like, oh, this is pretty good. And I think a lot of us might have thought FT4 was going to be even bigger, but you got to have a little better signal for that.
Yeah.
But for contesting, it's fantastic.
FT4 is the bomb for contesting, but there's a loss in sensitivity. Believe me, FT8. I'm laughing. I don't know how many people have used Feldhell. I have a little bit, and there's again amateur radio. There's a lot of different communication techniques. There's a dedicated group of people that love Hellschreiber, and it's fascinating because 30 years ago, I don't remember anybody running Hellschreiber, and now there are definitely people who do it, and there are more and more of them. But again, it's about the technology evolving. The idea of Hellschreiber is pretty old. I mean, Victor Hell figured that out in the 1920s, but it wasn't really practical in a home station until much more recently, when you had sound card-based software available that could make Feldhell a reality. That would make a great presentation. Yeah. Talk
Imagine
about
that.
Imagine that. Yeah. Another reason for me to run my mouth.
The other thing that I find interesting is, you talk about the CW component being taken out of the testing, but I'm seeing a resurgence in CW. I can't tell you how many people are interested, and if you try to get into a CW ops class or anything like that, there's a waiting list to get into those classes. Now, how many people finish the class? I don't know. I'm kind of doing it on my own and learning CW, but I've done some CW contesting already. Now using my computer, but still I'm doing it.
Nothing wrong with that.
I think what's that?
There's nothing wrong with that. That's
no, absolutely not. What we call it, digital FT8, right? Or the first FT8 is what some of the guys call it. But yeah, there's so much to do in this hobby, and so many things you can grab onto. There's something for everybody. Hellschreiber, FT8, moon bounce, satellite tracking, all that stuff. I mean, there's something for everybody. So, you may have your own knot, and that's what I love about the clubs is you may find someone who's a kindred spirit and want to do Hellschreiber, and the two you can, work that out, or three you can work that out, and you can have a lot of fun doing it. But then you can be part of the club and learn other things too. So, that's, like you said, the backbone of the hobbies, the clubs, and you're right, 100%.
One of the things that I think we deal with, and I love that word that you used, or phrase, raison d'être. I took 4 years of French and I still can't say it right. But the idea is why do we exist? Why do we keep our spectrum? Some people do say it's MCOM, but really, as you say, as our first century, we were the innovators. We were the ones that actually brought technology to the commercial sector so they could steal it from us. We brought in sideband, and the commercials say, "Hey, this isn't a bad idea. Less spectrum, and better distance communications, and the rest. We're going to take it." So we offered a lot. And when FT8 came out, I was just very amazed. I remember seeing one of Joe Taylor's presentations. And I'm thinking, this is really innovation. All of us that are older have gone through a lot. we basically had to do CW to get our license, so we knew about that. We weren't allowed to get on sideband until you got past the novice license, and then you were able to either get on AM or sideband. And then came RTTY, and of course, there was this negative thing about RTTY. And I was really fortunate. Our club decided that they were going to give out a Western Union teletype to anyone that could make a terminal unit. So I basically took the challenge and put it in a 3x5 card box and a 1-tube receiver that would get the mark tones, and brought it to them, put it on the table, and they said, "What's this?" And I said, "This is a terminal unit." And I showed them the QST article, put it down on the ground, and they just looked at me, and I said, "Well, do I get my teletype?" And sure enough, I got my teletype. And then Amtor came out, and I can't believe I actually did some stuff with Amtor, but it was the first air programming type of digital that we really knew about. But we've gone through all these different modes, and when FT8 came out, I'll tell you, I will not apologize. I've made close to, I think I've gone over 9,000 contacts with FT8. Kind of the nice thing is that you can make quick contacts, and if you decide you've got 15 minutes to spend on the radio, you do 15 minutes on the radio, and then you leave. And everyone's still happy, everyone's still making contacts. And I've got a ball with it myself, and make no apologies for it. And I've gone through quite a change from when I was a kid to now. I remember people that say, "Well, I'll only do CW." And at one time I said, "Wow, that's a real operator." Now I say, they're really depriving themselves of all that amateur radio has to offer. So the thing is, you shouldn't be negative towards other people's interesting modes of operation, because it makes them happy. It gets them involved in the hobby. It keeps our spectrum utilized, which basically justifies our existence as amateur radio operators. Some people like MCOM, some people like digital, some people like sideband, some people like CW. Live and let live. That's the amateur radio concept.
Well, I'm going to riff off of Brent's comment here. He said that Bob B challenged me to learn an aspect of ham radio and then share it with us. And I think everybody knows who Bob B is. That is the world famous Robert Bacharach, WA2EMF, now a silent key. He was depending on your point of view, he was a thorn in people's side. He was a tireless promoter. But if nothing else, he was a guy that loved ham radio, and he wanted to make sure that other people stayed involved and engaged. And if you weren't doing enough, he'd be the guy who would come by and say, "You should try something different." Those of you who, I think everybody on the panel has met Bob Bacharach, had met him past tense at one time or another. He was a character, and I kind of miss him. It's been about 15 months now, and I still think about him occasionally. And sometimes I find myself asking this question: what in the hell would Bob do? But I think there's value in Brent's comment. That's part of the engagement, is taking people and saying, get out of your comfort zone. Yeah, okay, so you've had a set of iambic paddles strapped to your right hand for the last 30 years. Try something else.
Mark, those of us who are VEs, I think, are seeing a pattern right now that one of the most common applications that would-be technician class applicants are pursuing is drone control. And I don't see a lot of clubs really addressing drones. And the point I want to make is I'm a big fan of the work, study work that's been undertaken by a Harvard University professor over the last 25 years by the name of Robert Putnam. He has published a seminal book called Bowling Alone, BOWLING, like the game that gets kids out of the streets and into the alleys. And it's a title to say that in the post-World War II environment, a lot of the way that we conduct ourselves in brotherhoods and fraternal organizations are not resonating with what people are doing in now the third decade of the 21st century. So people who are licensed hams, but under the age of 50, may not necessarily want to go to the cafeteria at the shopping mall for a Wednesday night dinner once a month. That's not how they want to engage and learn more. So when people, particularly the Guardians, and I'm not talking about the people who renamed the Cleveland Major League Baseball team, decide to challenge and say, where are all the young people? The numbers show that the young people are there. They just want to learn and engage in the format in which most of us have grown up and in which we're comfortable. And we all need to get out of our comfort zone, not only with the type of technology that we should be moving towards, but also the manner in which we engage with the newer generation of people.
I think that was one of the real positives of what YCARS has done. They're really not about dragging everybody out to that clubhouse for a meeting. They're real thrilled. They're glad if you show up for the Aries group or you go on Wednesday nights to just get on the air and operate, do different things. I think that's really the key to their success. They've essentially tried to meet the members where they are. Essentially, they've asked the question, well, what do you members want to do? And then they go out and they do it. And you're right, Bill, that's a lot more than having a bunch of people get together at Western Sizzlin' on the first Monday of the month for a 45-minute business meeting where you talk about how much money you're going to spend on a ham fest and, other deep philosophical issues like how much Canada weighs. I think
I'm smiling, Mark, because Jim and I are often invited, as I'm sure you are, to club meetings, and they say, well, make sure you're there, even if you're zooming in for your presentation by 7 p.m., and then you sit for an hour to an hour and a half through the business meeting until they finally get to you.
Yeah, no, we don't do that. We don't play that game, homie.
Yep.
We have a separate meeting for presentations.
I'm not going to name any clubs, but that has happened to me a couple of times, and it happened once at a club that for me is a long drive away. I actually had to leave work early in the afternoon to make this club for a affiliation certificate presentation, and it was a 3-hour and 45-minute drive. And I got there at 7 o'clock and sat through the business meeting, and it was I think it was a Thursday night. I had to work the next morning, and they finally let me do the certificate presentation. And it was the last thing on the agenda. And I don't think I got out of there till almost 9 o'clock. I got home about 1 a.m.
Mark, was that the club that you got up and you said, well, I don't have a lot to say, and they said, well, sit down?
Oh, no, that it was not that club. That was actually, I'll tell you who that club was. That was the Florence Club. I had gone to a Florence Amateur Radio Club meeting. They have it at a Ryan's or one of those all-you-can-eat buffets, Western Sizzlin'. I can't remember, Ponderosa. Gordon, you ever been over there for a meeting? I can't remember the restaurant where they have it, but I got there.
When I went, it was Shoney's.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah. But that may have changed.
Anyway, I drove to Florence, which is over 2 hours, and they asked me to make a couple comments. And, people are trying to have dinner, so I really don't want to take away from the dinner. So I stood up and said, thanks for letting me speak. I don't have a lot to say. Try to make this quick. And then immediately, the guy's name was Bill. He's back eating his dinner. He puts his fork down, stands up. He says, fine, then sit down. So you know what I did? I sat down. And I thought, I'll let the club president work this out with that guy. I'm not getting in the middle of it. And the club president went over and had discussion with that gentleman who never did apologize. The club president came back to me and he said, "Ignore him. We're here. Go ahead. The floor is yours." So anyway, it's the important thing about those things is if you want to know what people in clubs are doing, the only way you're going to know is to go spend some time with them. And lots of people do lots of different things. I would say for the folks in section leadership, it's important to be involved with that to the extent that we can. We can't get involved in all of it, but be involved in some of it because it's all important. Turns out that there's really very little people do in ham radio that is unimportant. It's all important. It's all important for different reasons. I'm just looking at that comment. Yeah.
You just have to retrace late.
I'm looking at that. I haven't done any slow scan in years, but yes, those were memes before there were. Yeah. It's funny how we do something and then 20 years later it becomes a thing, kind of like repeaters and cell phones. But the good news is that means we're usually on the front end of something. Sometimes we're just too far ahead for our own good, but eventually someone will figure out what to do with it. But I think we don't want to lose that spirit of doing, of creating, making new things. And clubs are going to be a big factor in helping that happen. Remote operating, or in the case of Y-Cars, they're fortunate enough to have their own club facility. We've all had experiences with HOAs. It's a great way to get people involved into ham radio and make sure they can actually operate. I haven't, I'll be honest, I don't get too involved in any particular club. It's being the section manager. It's kind of like being poor King Charles III. You really don't get to have a lot of opinions. You have to represent everybody. And so I try not to show anything that looks like favoritism. And I think some clubs are happy because that means they don't see too much of me. And, like Oscar Wilde once said, some people bring joy wherever they go, others whenever they go. All right. That's been a good evening. I managed to work Oscar Wilde in, my favorite playwright. So, other comments before we wrap this up on where we're going in the future?
I have a shameless plug.
Mark and group, COVID has been a disaster any way you look at it, but it's kind of opened doors for us. I've been able to attend a lot of club meetings virtually. Been able to get almost all around the state without really having to travel that much. So it's opened up new ideas as to how we can use technology. And on October 12th, tentatively, the PR committee is going to host an I'm a PIO Now What event for new PIOs. I'll send it out when get the date confirmed. I'll send it out to the state PIOs so that they know, and hopefully we'll have a good turnout for that. We're hoping, because, a lot of people get thrown into PIO and, okay, now what do I do? So we're going to try to help the PIOs get their job done. And that is it from beautiful Myrtle Beach.
I've already said too much, so I'm going to shut up. Have we got any comments we need to deal with from the group? Oh, go ahead, John.
I have one shameless plug. Rock Hill, York County Amateur Radio Society is hosting the 70th annual Rock Hill Hamfest. It's also the ARRL SC Section convention. So come to Rock Hill and join us, 1830 Celanese Road, October 1st from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Thank you, John. That reminds me I need to put in a shameless plug for the other 3 Hamfests in October. The details appear on the section webpage. There are posts out there. October 8th is the Lake Hartwell Hamfest in Anderson, South Carolina at Darwin Wright Park. That starts at 8 a.m. On October 8th, it's the South Carolina Military Museum Swap Fest at the South Carolina Military Museum. over by Williams-Brice Stadium. And that starts about 8 in the morning. That's essentially the rebranded, new and improved tailgate party that the Columbia Amateur Radio Club does. And then we just talked about the Lake Hartwell Hamfest, which is actually on October 15th. And October 22nd, in case KR4 Phil is still here, Gaffney Hamfest, 204 West O'Neill Street, Gaffney, South Carolina, 8 a.m. until. That's a nice little tailgate party that's grown into a neat little Hamfest. So I would encourage people to attend. What's the next Hamfest I'm attending? Next one is probably the Rock Hill Hamfest on October 1st. And I'm going to try to hit every one of those Hamfests in October. We'll see how I do. Phil, you're welcome. I didn't want to leave this evening without mentioning that Hamfest. I've been a couple of times. It's fairly new Hamfest. I think you guys have been only doing about maybe 4 years, but I've found some interesting buys there. So if you get a chance, make the trip over to Gaffney. And I'm trying to remember the name of that Baptist church. It's 204 West O'Neill Street. I remember the address. Got to put that in the nav system. I can't remember the name of the Baptist church parking lot where they hold it. Anyway, so there's a lot going on in October. 4 Hamfests every single weekend. And as John pointed out, the first one, October 1st, Rock Hill Hamfest, is also the South Carolina State Convention. We will not have a speaker from the league, but I'll be there, so you can listen to me. And I suspect that we may entice Dr. Jim, our Roanoke Division Director, to show up and make an appearance. I don't know about Bill Marine. He's over on the east coast of North Carolina, coming to Rock Hill. It's halfway around the world.
I'm looking to be there, Mark.
What about you, Bill? Do you think you'll make it, or
TBD, to be determined.
Okay.
It's Mark. I'm trying to remember how many ARRL affiliate clubs there are in South Carolina. I don't have it right in front of me right now.
I want to say about 4 dozen.
About 4 dozen, about like 48 of them.
Close to that, 46, 48, something like that.
There's 232 that Jim and I have to have relations with in the Roanoke division.
That sounds weird.
It's okay. Let me rephrase that.
Thank you.
There's 232 clubs with which we have a degree of interaction of some nature or another, and I love what I do representing the members of the league, as I'm sure Jim does. I'm sure you do, Mark, and John and Gordon. But when you get to those numbers, you can't be everywhere all at once.
Well, Bill, if you can make it, we would consider it an honor, a privilege to have you with us.
Thank you.
And Jim, same for you. I know that you not only have all the demands on your time that Bill just described, but as a practicing physician, you have another set of demands that are peculiar to that particular profession. I know you don't necessarily have 100% control over your on-call schedule. I'm part of the gainfully unemployed now, so for me, it's every week is 6 Saturdays and a Sunday. All right, anything else for the good of the group? We have run over time. We need to wrap this up.
I think that pretty much covered it. You guys hang around if you can. We'll talk a little shop once we get everybody out of here. We appreciate you guys coming in. Good comments. Pretty good amount of solid viewers. And we'll talk about something else. I wanted to get to some other things we found out during field day, but we just didn't have enough time, which is a good problem to have. Maybe we have to do something before the fourth quarter. But we can do that. We got plenty of time. So, anybody got anything to close?
I just want to thank everybody who checked in with us this evening, including but not limited to David. Who do we have? We had George Mudd, Phil Chandler, Merrill, KK4HFG, David, KY4GM, Brent Case, K4BSC. Thank you. Phil Jolly, always a pleasure to have you with us. KR4NO, glad I could say something about the Hamfest. Mark Elzy, K2CSX, somebody I don't know, but glad you're with us. And Broken Signal, KD5W, thank you not only for being with us, but having some really interesting comments. Really appreciate it. That's what we like. That's what makes this thing go. Let's see. And who else did we have? Well, we had the panel, the folks in front of me. I want to thank all of you for this hour and 15 minutes that you will never get back. I'm glad you gave it to us and shared it with all of us. And on that note, I hope everybody has a great evening and a better tomorrow.